Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting edition of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Vaughn Smith, and this is Cisco Cloud Fundamentals series, and we're continuing looking at our cloud service models. In this episode, we're going to look at platform as a service, and he is back, the Mr. Ronnie Wong. Hi, how are you?
I am doing well, Vaughn. Thank you again for joining me as we continue to move forward. And we are taking a look at so much information right now. And when we start to take a look at the idea of a cloud service model, we have already just in a previous episode reviewed the idea of infrastructure as a service. And of course, now we have to move on to some of the other models. Now, when we start to do that, right, we have to be able to differentiate the difference here, of course, between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. And we don't want to leave you just going, okay, I know what the difference is, but we also want to show you, of course, a real life example of what we're talking about too.
Okay, because this is like, I don't know, platform infrastructure in general terminology, I feel like they're kind of the same thing. Obviously they're not, but like, you know, to me it's like, which platform are you on? Like, to me, when I say the word platform, it's like, are you on Mac or you're on PC? Which is kind of an infrastructure because it's a computer. So how are we going to differentiate this?
Yeah, that is more of a platform, believe it or not, the idea of Windows versus PC here. But here, when we start doing it, let's start off, of course, with the correct, or I shouldn't say the correct, the Cisco type of definition that we need to, which, of course, comes from, well, our favorite document in this show so far, which is the SP 800-145. And we are in section 2 of that document. We've, of course, have reviewed the idea of the definition of what cloud computing really is. And we've talked about it as being the idea of a model, okay, for us, and that those models, of course, are broken down or composed of 5 different characteristics. And we are in this section where we talk about 3 different service models. We are in the second of 3 service models, and of course, the different essential characteristics. Make sure you know that as you get ready for the exam. But now as we head into the service models here, I kind of take it backward because I think logically it actually makes sense for us. So we've talked about the idea of infrastructure service and how much more responsibility that we're willing to take on versus what the cloud service provider is. When we come down to the idea of platform as a service, the capability provided to the consumer is to deploy the cloud infrastructure, consumer-related or required applications created using programming languages, libraries, services, tools supported by the provider. The consumer does not manage or control the underlying infrastructure or anything else here. And so, Vaughn, all of a sudden, this definition, like, what? Huh?
I feel like that's the exact same definition as what we just went over.
Well,
to be completely honest, I'm like,
yeah.
Wait, didn't they? Those are like the same words, kind of, right?
Almost exactly the same words, except that now when you start to take a look, it's actually right here where they talk about the idea of acquired applications that were created using, oh, look at that, programming in the background here. Programming languages, libraries, services, supported tools that are provided, you know, that actually are there by the provider itself. So when we start to actually focus in on this idea of that, we now can take a look at the responsibilities a little bit more clear, okay? So let's start off by making sure I'm actually telling you the right thing here, yeah. So this one, okay? So let's kind of review this idea of the infrastructure as a service. We're really taking a look at it from the standpoint of what we see over here on the right-hand side. What is a customer's responsibility versus what is cloud provider's responsibility? And infrastructure as a service, notice how much responsibility we really do have, right? We choose the operating system on the virtual we create the actual virtual servers that we have. We choose the operating system, whatever other infrastructure that we need, applications. We essentially set up the whole thing. The provider itself is pretty much saying, here's the servers you're going to use. Here's the networking equipment you're going to use. Here's how you get out to the internet, and you have to set that all up yourself. And whatever applications you provide, you have to actually you install on your own, or you buy the licensing from us, and then we actually give you access to be able to do it. But you have to configure, you have to do everything else, okay? When it comes down to platform as a service, though, let me see if I can find I've got to scroll out here. Now, notice, Vaughn, I've actually changed the responsibilities quite a bit by comparison. When we start to take a look at it, we can now see in terms of the customer responsibility versus the cloud provider's responsibility, there's a lot less responsibility for us, okay? And now what they've done is that they said, look, we'll actually provide everything except for what you really want to accomplish in the cloud, Okay. And this is actually one of those things that we want to understand. The customer does not set up any of the infrastructure that needs to be set up, unlike the infrastructure as a cloud, okay, as a service, excuse me, but they just have to be willing to say, all right, here's exactly what I need, and they select from whatever the cloud providers actually put out there for them. And then once they do that, then they can build the application so they get directly to work, okay, without having to actually build everything else in the background, then go, let's go ahead and start working, okay? And that is something that we really want to understand, because if we don't, you actually start to go, oh, well, I have to build this before I can get to do this. Nope. Platform as a service says, all right, you've already told us what you need, so here's what we're providing for you. You just have to do the work. So Vaughn, where this is actually a big, gigantic gold mine, right, is in the land of development and DevOps. And the reason why, okay, is such a big, huge thing in DevOps is because even though developers, they know developing, I don't know any, I know a little bit of, in terms of doing some coding to make things work. I can write just 2 or 3 very basic scripts overall. But developers, though, they may know everything that there is to know about network or about coding, what they need to get done in terms of an application that they need to write or build. But Vaughn, it could be that those same people, they don't know how to build up a test infrastructure, okay, that they might need to run the application and see how well it works. So if I did that to a developer that says, oh, I learned how to code, but now I say, all right, so test it out, tell me that it's working here, here's our infrastructure, so just go ahead and build it. That might be more challenging than them, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. As soon as you started kind of going through it, and again, at that first, my gut reaction was like, oh, that's the same. No, they're not, obviously. And now that you've kind of gone through it a little bit, that line moving totally, like, it explains it more. Right. And I did automatically start thinking about Justin and things like, because he's our developer guy, and things like Ruby and those different languages, and programming. Okay, so we're talking about platform programming. You can even do like the 2 Ps, so you can kind of connect those together. And then infrastructure, my brain goes to hardware. Okay, it's the actual like physical boxes and things. So that's where infrastructure and platform differentiates. Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great way for you to differentiate that if you really haven't had a lot of experience in understanding the kind of fluidity that cloud allows you to do. But yeah, it actually does give us an analogy back to those differences that we were talking about. Sure does.
And it sounds like with the infrastructure as a service, you get a little bit more flexibility. You can kind of pick and choose. With the platform, this is what we got, because you only have one little part that you kind of choose. The rest of it is already determined for you.
Right. So if you actually do this, you do get a little bit of flexibility. You can add on additional things as you do so. But generally, you're actually saying to the service provider, here's what I need. And they go, okay, here's what you need. And then you just at least know how to connect to it, and then you can start working with it right away. So for example, right here at IT Pro TV, if you think about it, right, we develop our own web app, as you actually logged into the website and everything too. Well, even if our developers, if they know how to do that, that's great. But what if they didn't know how to set up like the back end servers for things, and they didn't know how to actually make the network connection that they need to? They haven't worked with a web application firewall. They haven't done all this stuff yet, but they know how to code, and it makes our website look beautiful and fairly interactive. But what about all the other things that are needed there for protecting, for doing all that stuff, for bringing all that stuff up? If they don't know that, then providing something that says, here's the package that we can provide, put it all together, and all you have to do is actually know how to code with it, how to do it. And they've got it all set up. Essentially, platform as a service makes a boon for that actually DevOps environment, because they've got it set up to make it work, and they can set up a test environment, they can set up a production environment. They just have to actually be able to work with what they need to. So the challenges here, though, in terms of providing for something like this is fairly simple, okay? Is that you do have what we call different types of shared processes that have to be run when you're doing this. And so as far as efficiency goes, it actually is relatively efficient. But the other thing is that because we don't actually need full virtualized servers a lot of times, it means they're not super isolated from each other as well, okay? Also, of course, in terms of isolation, we're talking about really dedicated processes sometimes. Now, sometimes you do. A lot of times you don't have to actually think about it too. In efficiency, it's actually relatively efficient because you're not really taking up a lot of space. You're actually just kind of making sure that those things are in place and that they're ready to work. Isolation, again, is kind of limited in that sense. But in terms of the actual virtualization process, if you actually have just the virtualization itself and you're actually relying on it, you're saying, I need the whole environment virtualized, well, then you can separate out everything. So if you actually need some of this stuff, right, and you only need part of the platform, you don't need the fully virtualized server that puts everything on there and isolates it completely, well, then you don't have to pay for that. You pay for whatever platform that you actually want to. You actually can do this. But right back here is the key for us understanding, right? The customer's responsibility is all about making sure that they can work with the application itself and that they can actually, again, rely on the cloud provider to provide essentially the rest of this is what we want to be able to do, okay? Now, once we actually have that in mind, we can take a look at this, again, from the actual standpoint of, well, now our kind of a little hands-on demonstration here. Now, here's where it becomes a little bit more muddied, or I'm trying to think of blurring the actual lines here, okay? So in the previous episode, we took a look at infrastructure as a service as being like AWS, where they provide the entire infrastructure. But over time, though, they've actually gotten into the world of platform as a service too. So notice machine learning here, okay? Well, and this something like any of this stuff that does machine learning that we want to do, Vaughn, you and I don't have to actually know how to get that machine ready to learn it. We might have to learn the programming language. We might have to do that. But overall, though, they're saying, hey, we've got this set up where it's actually ready to go, okay? Where now you can actually get in there and do that. Robotics. Vaughn, I know nothing about robotics, but if I know how to code for robotics, they're saying we can actually get in there and do that. Blockchain. Vaughn, I don't know how to set up anything about blockchain, but guess what? Here it is. Amazon actually says there's a managed blockchain service that they have to get ready. Vaughn, do you know anything about satellite connections and communication with ground station?
Oh, yeah, that's what I do on the weekend.
I mean, yeah, that's what we do all the time, right? Well, they're saying what? Well, if you know at least the processes that have to go on, we can do what? And hey, look at that that little tooltip that popped up here. Okay, Vaughn, have you ever communicated with satellites?
Not on purpose.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't know how to establish that communication, but what are they saying, Vaughn? They're saying what? We already have what? The platform for you to do what? For you to make it happen. Did we have to build it from the very fact that I got a virtual machine? I've got to install the actual operating system. I got to figure out what application actually goes here to make it work. No. Essentially, this is a platform as well.
And it goes a little bit more like you're saying, the programming, like the satellites are programmed in a certain language, and so we need to interact with it. So that's why it's giving you that platform to interact with.
Yeah. So originally, when it comes down to it, we are now moving on to a different service provider because I don't want to kind of pigeonhole us into one here, okay? So notice there is Microsoft Azure, okay? Now, everybody pronounces this differently as well. Adam Gordon, who is our Microsoft expert, right? He says Azure,
yeah.
And I say Azure, and I don't know, many different. I've heard it pronounced 2 or 3 different. I'm like, I think it's Azure. I think that's what they mean is cloud.
That's what I
Azure.
say. Yeah.
But Azure is what he says.
Tomato,
no,
tomato,
it's the way
right?
it's going. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but originally it was actually a platform as a service model. But Vaughn, they've actually expanded out, right? And notice virtual machines. You can create virtual machines. Storage. You can create storage here. Okay. So they have that partitioning, that pooling that we talked about. And then as you continue to go on, there's actually even more stuff in there, such as, of course, the abstraction of what we need. So over on the left-hand side, you have quite a bit more over here that you can actually connect to. And virtualized networks, again, is that idea of the abstraction that we're talking about.
And again, I know this isn't a Microsoft class, but this is, well, I pulled up a couple, because I did a quick Google search while you were doing stuff, because I'm just like, the difference between the platform and the infrastructure. And on 2 different websites, one puts Azure in the infrastructure, and the other website puts it as the platform.
Right.
And as soon as you just said that, I'm like, oh, so it started as a platform, but they've grown into where they've actually kind of talk about blurring the lines.
Right. Yeah.
They're kind of getting into the infrastructure game in a sense.
Well, and like I said, at the very beginning, it was just the idea of a platform, okay? But once they realized that the cash cow actually went into infrastructure as a service as well, they wanted to compete inside, and Azure is probably number 2, far distant number 2 in terms of the cloud platform. AWS is definitely number 1 and everything. But AWS also said, look, we're an infrastructure as a service, but we can do some of this platform stuff too. And so they got in that. So now the lines are actually blurred. Whereas if you actually go and look at study guides for even this particular exam, it's actually a little bit of an older exam. I think last time they updated this was about 2016. The objectives that we're working on is really from that time period as well. That back then they were saying, here's some distinct lines that you can draw. Well, we can't do that because cloud technology changes every single day. And for those that are actually working on our cloud shows, Vaughn, you've heard the idea, right? Is that one day they can actually be showing this, and next day the actual platform, the portal interface actually changes. The whole thing actually changes and it rearranges itself. And I've had that happen to me even in Office 365. I've gone through that show and I've seen that actually happening during the recording of an entire show before.
Oh yeah, I had that in Excel.
Yeah.
Where the actual environment completely different. So, but that's a really good point. Again, I know we keep saying this, but like the definitions that we are going to be tested on, you do need to make that differentiation. But in real life, in the real world, AWS kind of straddles both the infrastructure and the platform, and same with Azure.
Right.
But there is a distinction when we're talking about like the pure definition of these terms.
Yeah, and there are some companies out there that actually give you exactly what we're talking about in terms of platform as a service. They're smaller out there, and don't get me wrong, they're usually purpose-driven. In other words, if your environment needs it, you're going to go to that one is what will happen. But let's just take a look at this as we get started here, okay? So with Azure here, since we're only really focusing in on the idea of platform as a service, well, the great thing is we can actually use that. Now, you can also get a free account with Azure too, so that you can go in and take a look at it as well. So there's two different cloud environments that you really want to be super familiar with, at least as of when you're watching this show. AWS, you don't have to be the greatest at it, but you should feel comfortable in moving around and understanding what's actually there. And also, of course, Microsoft Azure. Those are the two biggest players in the market. Third behind that is probably what we call Google Compute, and they're kind of the next one that's actually out there as well, okay? Now, for us though, Azure as a service as far as platform goes, or Azure services, well, the great thing is, Vaughn, they actually make it fairly easy for us right here. Oh, look at that, application services. So they don't even try and go, oh, platform as a service. They just say app services here, and if I click on app services, is right here where I can go in and I can now just say, hey, what type of service do I want to add in to make sure it actually works the way I need to? I can click on the plus sign, and now, Vaughn, there's not really a ton of limitations, but look at all these different web apps that can be deployed fairly easily for someone, okay? I want to actually just produce a web app, perfectly fine. But what if I know I need a database along with it? See, notice they're actually combining those services together to provide the platform that we actually need to. Well, Vaughn, I might know how to build a web app, which I don't, okay? So don't say it, okay? But I might not know anything about what? How do I connect that to an actual database of some sort, an SQL database? How do I do something like that? Well, I might not know that. Now I have to do what? If I were actually doing this manually, Vaughn, I'd have to now go and learn at least how does that database connect to my web app? And then how do I store the data in there? How am I actually building this to make it work if I'm going to do something like this? Well, Vaughn, they're actually saying, look, we've got it connected and we're ready to go if we choose to launch something like this. There's other things, stuff I've never even heard of. Here's Joomla, okay? Here's Kusanagi for Microsoft Azure. I don't know what that is.
Joomla, I remember Joomla.
Yeah.
It's an old like web platform.
There you go. See, another web platform. Yeah. All of these I think are pretty much web services.
Yeah.
At least that's the category that I chose here. Was actually web services is what I chose. Okay, web apps. And this one's blog and CMS is what we see. And then starter web apps. You name it. There's plenty of them that you can do. And if you want to, just even an empty HTML5 web app that's actually available there. LAMP, you can actually build your own LAMP server. You name it. There's plenty of them. And Vaughn, once I do this, I don't have to start with what? Oh, I got to build a virtualized server. I got to choose what operating system I'm going to work. I got to download the WordPress on Linux app, and then, once it's done, I mean, it's already there. It's done, and it's actually out there ready to go, okay? That's kind of what makes it neat. And even more, okay, and we're not actually getting in this yet, but in the next one that we're going to talk about briefly here, okay? Notice this, they call it e-commerce, okay? Now, this is also sort of a platform where they're saying, here's how you connect to these e-commerce things as well. But that also kind of blurs the line with that software as a service to a point too. But overall, though, you kind of see where you can set something like this up to do this, okay? So let me just choose something like this, just the web app itself. And when I do that, over on the lower left-hand corner, a little bit behind my head, I don't know if I can actually get so that you can barely see. There it is, okay? So over here, notice that it actually says, oh, let me zoom back in here for a moment, okay? Vaughn, now you and I have actually done this before where we created a web server just for a class that you wanted to, and you said, I want to learn how to do this. So we showed you how to do this with a Microsoft Windows, like 2008 or something. It was way back, if you remember.
Yes,
we actually did a web server for you.
The IIS and everything.
Yeah, IIS, right? So here it says, Vaughn, if you remember, I actually made you install the operating system. I made you actually install the service. It took a bit of time. Vaughn, notice what this actually says here.
Now you all just have it. It's just one little button, isn't it?
Yeah, but look at that. Create and deploy a website in
seconds.
Seconds is what it actually says.
Click, done.
Yeah. So it's right here. Leverage your existing tools to create and deploy applications without the hassle of managing infrastructure. That's exactly what platform as a service is about, okay? It's about making sure that we can do this without having to go through. Vaughn had to actually make sure that the hardware that we ran on it, that it actually met up the requirements. And I asked Vaughn how big the hard drive was. I don't know how big the hard drive is. And so, we had to look that up and make sure that it actually worked for what she wanted to do. Okay, that was a long time ago because I remember we were using Server 2008, so it was a while ago when we did that.
I'm actually trying. It's escaping me right now. It was what Dreamweaver. It was Microsoft's version of Dreamweaver. What was that thing called?
I don't remember now. Yeah, but that was exactly what we did. Yeah, sure.
Oh, what was that called?
I don't know.
I used to teach it.
Down here at the bottom, I simply click Create. And then when I do that, notice it's actually going to give me this name here, and we'll call it Vaughn. Or Vaughn. We'll call it Vaughn app. Just do it that way. Let me zoom in so we can see it. Notice you actually select the actual subscription that you want, okay? And then are you actually creating a new resource group so that you can access it? And what version? I'm going to run it on Linux at this particular point if it lets me do that. And then, of course, the runtime stack, I'm going to leave all the defaults. And down here at the bottom.
Sorry.
Great. Okay. All right. So Vaughn actually figured out what we were doing.
It was front page.
Front page.
Oh,
That's
gosh.
what it was.
That's how good it was, is that I completely wanted to get it out of my memory because there was so much setup. This was, again, 10 plus years ago, at least.
It was close. I'm trying to think. I think it was 2010. I really believe it was 2010. Because 2012 had not yet come out. That's why we were using the...
Yeah, I couldn't even remember the software that I used to have to teach people.
Right.
Front page. Okay,
it happens.
Oh, it wasn't fun. That was for sure.
All right, so in the end, it says validation is successful, and now it's taking its time to build, and I can see that it's actually building up here. In terms of notification, notice it tells me that the deployment is in progress, okay? So Vaughn, this is them actually doing the same thing that we did, but they're saying that they can do it in a matter of seconds. Now, this is the weird thing, Vaughn. Even though they can do it in a matter of seconds, you and I have learned something, especially in working with all the cloud gurus around here. Vaughn, seconds can actually mean minutes, okay? And minutes can actually mean, at times, hours.
Wait until after lunch for everything to go ahead and configure and do all that stuff.
And sometimes when it says it takes hours, it can mean 24 hours as well before everything settles down. And that's because of the way that the cloud is spread out and what they have to do to make sure everything is synchronized away. And Vaughn, look at that. Deployment has succeeded here. If I select go to the resource now, and zoom out so that we can see it, there it is, Vaughn. And right now, according to this, your web app is up and running, okay? So that means that now, Vaughn, you don't have to go in and set that up. You can go ahead and start deploying your particular web app page and everything that you actually need to right there.
I feel like we're like two old people. Like, I used to have to walk to school in the snow up 3 miles up the hill and everything. Like, do you know what we had to do back in the day?
That is true, okay? So sometimes we do feel like that. But yeah, this technology has been around for a while. Now, you do want to understand just a few other things too, okay? So like right up here, how do I actually stop this if I don't want it to run? Well, you simply stop it, okay? Now notice it says, are you sure you want to stop it? Well, yes, I'm actually sure I want to stop it. So if I go ahead and stop it, it will go ahead and stop that. That's that same collateral effect. I'm not actually going to the server image itself, right, Vaughn? Notice that here, I'm actually in the web portal saying what? Stop it. we're not having to actually even launch up the actual server that we launch and then tell it to shut down or to tell it to kick off. This is that idea. It's actually doing the work for us is what we're doing. Notice it tells me that it's stopped, and I actually went ahead and stopped this, but I want you to pay attention to this. Okay.
Ooh.
App service plan charges still apply. And this is another kind of I don't want to say downfall, a challenge, I guess, or that we have to actually face in cloud services.
This is that whole pay as you go.
Yep.
And if you just leave something running and you're just like, oh, it's fine, and then you get the bill, whatever later, you just have to be very conscientious about services or anything that you're running.
Mm-hmm.
If it's running, you could be running up your bill.
Right. And even if I stopped it, right, I'm actually using space on Azure, right? And so they're saying, hey, we're going to charge you for the use of that space. So if you leave it running, or even if it's stopped, you're actually still provisioned. You're actually taking up their resource.
You're paying for the storage, not just the actual running.
Yeah.
So there's a couple little layers in, hey, this is even installed.
Yep.
So that is a fee versus just having it run. So you can turn it off, but you're still acquiring fees because of the storage and other resources that you're asking for.
So that's the difference between when you actually hear the idea of start and stop and delete, okay? So notice if I select delete here, it of course does nothing. Now it actually says, hey, enter the name of the app. So it doesn't want me to delete it by accident. I have to enter the web app here.
Oh, so you physically have to type the name in so you didn't just accidentally just like, oh, look, we just deleted our entire customer database. Or
Exactly, yeah. It wants you to actually verify here. And notice it shows a couple things, right? 2 resources will be deleted. So Vaughn, I didn't do anything about the service plan at all, okay? But it created it for me because that's part of the actual platform that I actually worked on to do everything that we needed to. So yes, I'm just going to simply delete that as well. And that way, at least I think I clicked on it. Okay, so in the moment here, like I said, sometimes you actually realize that it's...
There's something down below the done.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I got to actually do that too. There it goes. Thank you. Okay, so Vaughn, there it goes. So it finally deleted, and we do see the delete operation. So I successfully stopped it. I deleted it here. Everything is now done, and we are set back to the way that we actually were in the very beginning here, where we did this. So Vaughn, we didn't have to build anything. We simply said, here's the app that we want running, and that runs for us, and that is exactly what happens here. It's my responsibility to manage the application, but the underlying infrastructure itself, that is all that the cloud provider actually does and what needs to be done here, okay? So Vaughn, that is a good summarization of us taking a look at the idea of platform as a service, or PaaS, as you actually might see that acronym instead. So it's important that we understand that. It's a good kind of little summary and a good example of what platform as a service does for us. Most of us probably tend to go with this, okay? Especially on that DevOps end, we just need it running. I don't want to really take the time, Vaughn, to build up the infrastructure or to make the networking connections that I need to. I don't want to have to do all that. Platform as a service is probably the good kind of middle ground that we do. Now, we're not completely done yet, Vaughn. We have one more service model that we have to go over. But overall, though, Vaughn, in terms of platform as a service, we are done for that one. And that means there's a lot more for you to study, and there is some others to come. So make sure you stay around for that, too.
All right. Well, I'm excited about this because I'm learning. And it always feels good when you're learning and you're getting it. I'm like, all right. And, of course, that that the lines are extremely blurry.
Right.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you for joining us. But we are going to go ahead and sign off for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Vaughn Smith.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.